They say history was written by the victors, but in ancient times it was a little different. History was written by the people who bothered to write it down. When you think about the ancient Mediterranean, a few different cultures might come to mind. The Greeks, the Romans, maybe the Egyptians. But the reason we think about these cultures so much is because they wrote the most stuff. Ancient Athens, for example, was far less important on the world stage than a lot of other cultures of their time. But historians won't shut up about them. Why? Because the Athenians wouldn't shut up about themselves. The Persians, for example, only wrote a little bit. As a result, we only know a little bit about them. But there are plenty of other cultures that never wrote anything at all. In those cases, all we have to go on is archaeological evidence or outsider viewpoints when we're lucky enough to have them. One of those cultures that never bothered to write anything was the Scythians. And spoiler alert, I know it's only about a minute or so into the video, but I'm already letting the cat out of the bag. There were transgender people who lived among the Scythians, and they seemed pretty well accepted as well. When I learned about the transgender people living among the Scythians, it was one of the coolest things I had ever heard. In fact, it was that little tidbit of knowledge that started me on the journey of putting this video series together in the first place. However, there's very little information written down about it. I had to dig pretty deep into some primary sources, because modern scholarship has really only grazed the surface. But as the picture became clearer and clearer to me, I became more and more excited about what I was reading. And now, I want to share what I've discovered with all of you. So, without further ado, Chapter 1. Who were the Scythians? If you've never heard of the Scythians before, you're not alone. They're not really one of the more mainstream ancient cultures. They're a little more obscure. You probably haven't heard of them. So let's spend a little bit of time getting to know them before we get to the trans stuff. The Scythians lived mostly on a territory known as the Great Steppe. It's a huge swath of territory, stretching from modern-day Bulgaria all the way to Manchuria, the northeastern coast of China. If you're familiar with Genghis Khan and his Mongol Empire, the Great Steppe is where they got started, and it's where they launched the campaigns to conquer a big chunk of the world from. Genghis Khan was like 1,000 years in the future, though, so if you're not familiar with him, don't worry about it. Anyway, the Great Steppe is considered very good territory for horseback riding because it's very flat and there's not a lot of trees to deal with. And the Scythians certainly took advantage of this. When you take a look at a lot of their art, you see the horse showing up over and over again. Now, when we think of ethnic groups today, we usually think about them in the well-defined terms of nation-states. The Spanish, for example, mostly live in Spain. Of course, the Spanish are free to move to different countries if they so choose, but they mostly live in Spain. People in one part of Spain know what's going on more or less in other parts of Spain, should they care to find out, and there's a sense of national unity, even if it's stronger in certain parts of the country than it is in others. The ancient world wasn't like that. Most ancient cultures were not politically unified. In fact, we're not even sure if the Scythians who lived near the Black Sea, which are the ones that we're going to be talking about, even knew about the ones who lived closer to Manchuria. So why do we say that they're all the same culture? Because looking at the archaeological remains, we can see that their burial practices were similar, their art was similar, the motif of the horse was similar, but it doesn't necessarily mean they were exactly the same, or they spoke the exact same language, or that they even knew about each other. As a result, there's a huge swath of Scythian life that we know nothing at all about, and a lot more that we do know about that we're just going to gloss over in this series. Really, I should have called this video the Black Sea Scythians. Yeah, well, I'll edit it in post. So it's tempting for me, as somebody with just a general interest in ancient Mediterranean history, to just start nerding out on a whole bunch of details about the Scythians. I could go on and on for hours about this stuff, but that's not why you're here. That's not the point of this series. You're here because you want to know about the ancient trans stuff, and I'm going to give it to you. But just so you know, if you do find the Scythians interesting, I highly recommend the book The Scythians by Barry Cunliffe. He's one of the foremost scholars when it comes to researching the Scythians. If you're mostly interested in the trans stuff, stick around, I'm going to give you what you need, but if you want to learn more about the Scythians, that's where you should start. On the other hand, if you want to learn more about trans history, so you can build a smug sense of superiority over the ridiculous turf arguments you hear all the time, stick around. Chapter 2, Ancient Primary Sources. So for our purposes today, we have 3 primary sources when it comes to assembling an idea of what life was like for a transgender Scythian. We have Herodotus and Pseudo-Hippocrates, both Greeks, and Ovid, a Roman. Herodotus lived in the Greek city of Halicarnassos in the 5th century BCE, which at the time was part of the Persian Empire, and today it's part of Turkey. He wrote a book called History, which is considered the first proper piece of actual historical research, sort of the Black Sabbath of history. He traveled all over the place to research his book, including Persia, mainland Greece, Egypt, Babylon, and Scythia. Pseudo-Hippocrates, on the other hand, we know almost nothing about. We have a collection of about 60 different pieces of writing from the ancient world, which we've called the Hippocratic Corpus. It's based on the teachings of Hippocrates, the Hippocratic Oath guy that, doctors say the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, yada yada, this guy, that's the guy we're talking about. But it was almost certainly not him who actually wrote it, and it's almost certainly not written by one person. But that's all we know. So we just say it's by Pseudo-Hippocrates because that seems like as good a name as any, and I don't know what, you got any better ideas? There's a lot of interesting stuff in the Hippocratic Corpus, but for our purposes today, we're interested in one of the pieces called On Airs, Waters, and Places. The author of this one talks quite a bit about the Scythians in a way that suggests that they'd actually been there. We think it was written around the same time Herodotus assembled his work, but there's no real reason to believe that the two ever crossed paths. Ovid, on the other hand, lived much later. Publius Ovidius Naso was his name. We call him Ovid to keep it simple. He lived during the end of the 1st century BCE and the beginning of the 1st century CE, largely during the reign of the Emperor Augustus. He was considered one of the greatest poets of his day, and is still considered one of the greatest Latin poets of all time, and enjoyed a very privileged position within the imperial court. Until, at some point, Ovid did something to piss off Augustus so badly that Augustus banished him from the entire empire, not just kicked out of the city, kicked out of the empire altogether. It's pretty harsh punishment considering just how bloody big the Roman state was at the time. At this point, most of the known world that wasn't under Roman rule was undeveloped wilderness, with some scattered barbarian tribes here and there. So where's a poet to go? He decided on the city of Tomis on the coast of the Black Sea. Today it's the city of Constanta in Romania, and he was miserable there. Absolutely miserable. He missed his wife, he missed his social life, he missed the great libraries of Rome, he missed being around other people who spoke his language. And so he just spent his time in sad boy hours writing sad boy poetry and being just generally miserable. One of the poems he wrote was Amores, and it has one little tidbit in there which just absolutely lights my brain on fire with the possibilities it suggests, but we're going to get to that. Unfortunately, Ovid died there in Tomis, never being able to see his home city again, despite outliving the emperor by several years. So today on our journey to uncover the transgender history of the Scythians, those 3 guys are going to be our ancient companions. Chapter 3. Gender fluidity among the Scythians. Now this may come as a huge shock to you, but sometimes people make stuff up. I'm not talking about things that are obviously made up, like novels or plays or whatever. I mean just flat out lies. And it turns out that really, strip away the computers and the cell phones and all the other technology, and the ancients were just like us, which means they were just as capable of lying as we are. But of course, the further back we go, the fewer sources we have on things. So in many cases, we're lucky to have one source. Sometimes they're obviously bunk, like that old story about Caligula electing his horse as consul. You might have heard that one before. It's almost certainly nonsense. There's only one source for this, and it was written like 100 years after Caligula's death. It probably didn't happen, and if it did happen, it probably wasn't because he was crazy, but because he wanted to show the Senate that he could take their most coveted position and have a horse fill it. That's how unimportant the Senate was under his reign. But that's a whole other topic and it has nothing to do with being trans, so let's move on. Anyway, the point is, if one person says something, it might be true. But if two people say it, and they say it independently of each other, well, there might be something interesting there. In most cases, we don't get this. But with the Scythians, we do. Both of our Greek companions note that the idea the Scythians had of gender was very different than what they had. Scythian women would serve as horseback archers. As young girls, they would have their right breast removed in order to make it easier to fire a bow. And I mean, I haven't fired a bow since, but I imagine it might get in the way. That might be easier without it there. I don't know. Herodotus called them amazos, which meant missing a breast. That's where we get the word Amazon from. Herodotus also notes that in the Scythian language, these horseback archer women were known as manslayers, and that they remained virgins until they had killed a man in battle. And honestly, that sounds so cool and so interesting. Why is it that I'm only hearing about this now? Oh, right. Now, this is obviously different than the role Greek women played in Greek society, and it's clearly different than the role modern women play in society as well. But are they actually transgender? In the introductory chapter of this series, I talked about the problem of defining ancient people as transgender in times before the word transgender even existed. I recommend you go check it out at some point, but I'm not going to make you do it right now. Don't worry about it. I'll cover the salient points right here. Queer historian Susan Stryker's definition of transgender in a historical sense is, quote, people who move away from the gender they were assigned at birth, people who cross over the boundaries constructed by their culture to define and contain their gender. So if we go by this definition, the Scythian horseback archer women were not transgender, since the act of slicey was just part of the game for a Scythian woman. Basically, they were just cis girls, but their idea of what a cis girl was in their culture is different than ours, because gender is a social construct. On the other breast, both writers give us quite a bit to explore when talking about another group in Scythian society. They called them the Enarei, which is a Greek word which just means effeminate, though we're not sure what they called themselves. Pseudo-Hippocrates begins.
And in addition to these, there are many eunuchs among the Scythians who perform female work and speak like women. Such persons are called Enarei. The inhabitants of the country attribute the cause of their impotence to a god, and venerate and worship such persons, every one dreading that the like might befall himself. They put on female attire, reproach themselves for effeminacy, play the part of women, and perform the same work as women do.
So when Pseudo-Hippocrates talks about the Enarei playing the role of women, we're not sure if he's talking about what he would expect a woman's role to be, or that they served as horseback archers. Based on the way he describes it, though, it seems like the former. Herodotus, on the other hand, tells us more about their spiritual life.
There are among the Scythians many diviners, who divine by means of many willow wands, as I will show. They bring great bundles of wands, which they lay on the ground and unfasten, and utter their divinations, laying one rod on another. And while they yet speak, they gather up the rods once more, and lay them one by one. This manner of divination is hereditary among them. The Enarei, who are androgynous, say that Aphrodite gave them the art of divination, which they practice by means of lime tree bark. They cut this bark into 3 portions, and prophesy while they plait and unplait these in their fingers.
Earlier, he provides us with a mythological reason for why this is the case.
When the Scythians came on their way to the city of Ascalon in Syria, most of them passed by and did no harm, but a few remained behind and plundered the temple of heavenly Aphrodite, and all their descendants after them were afflicted by the goddess with the female sickness, and so the Scythians say that they are afflicted as a consequence of this.
Okay, let's take a moment here. So there is so much packed into each one of those quotes. I don't even know where to start. So we know the Enarei are eunuchs, which means they were assigned male at birth. We know they appear to be very feminine, which suggests they may have been castrated at a very young age, before the ravages of testosterone had its way with their bodies. And we know that they played a women's role in their society. So take a moment to consider that. I mean, really think about it. I just told you that there is ironclad proof, as ironclad as we can get for as far back as we're going, that there were transgender people existing at least 2,400 years ago. Is that not the coolest thing you've ever heard? Why am I the first person to put together a presentation like this? Why is it that I had to do such deep research to find this out? Why has nobody... But as you can see, if you take a look at the status bar on this YouTube video, we ain't done yet. The fact that I just revealed the smoking gun for the existence of transgender people 2,400 years ago at least is not the coolest thing I've discovered. Stick with me, it gets better. Herodotus seems to talk about the Enarei mostly in relation to a certain group of Scythians called the Royals. These were the Scythians who lived east of the Garis River. Today it's called the Molochna River, and it's in southern Ukraine. The Scythian king and his family did live there, but not all the royal Scythians were part of the royal family, if that makes sense. One of the ways that the Enarei served as diviners was when the king became ill. When that happened, the assumption was somebody was cursing him, because why else would the king get sick? So what he would do was he would call the 3 most well-respected Enarei in the community and try to figure out who it was that was cursing him. This is the only specific situation that we know the Enarei served in, and it's assumed that the king didn't get sick every day, so they must have had something else to do, but we don't know. In general, though, it sounds like it was a pretty important job. So it seems a little weird that Herodotus would say they were ashamed of their effeminacy. Whether he actually observed them feeling shame, or that was his own cultural biases creeping in, or he just wasn't into trans girls.
Herodotus doesn't like trans girls. Cancel Herodotus!
We'll never know. Now, when Herodotus describes the Enarei, he says they have a, quote, female sickness. Pseudo-Hippocrates says the members of Scythian elite society, having worn tight trousers and having ridden on horseback all the time, were impotent. As a result, many scholars tend to just assume Herodotus was talking about their impotence and move on with their lives to study much more important, much more dignified topics, like whether or not Sappho was a lesbian. However, Rachel Hart points out in her paper, Neither Men Nor Women, that Herodotus describes impotence in a bunch of other sections of his work as well, and at no point does he describe it like a female sickness. So that suggests it's possible that Herodotus was referring to something else. We might have an answer to what that something else was in Ovid's Amores. In Book 1, Elegy 8, he says, quote,
There's a certain old woman called Dipsas. She knows what herbs to use, how to whirl the bull roarer, and the value of the virus from a mare in heat.
Yeah, it's not that exciting at face value, so let's take a closer look. First of all, let's take a look at this word virus. It's a Latin word that I deliberately left untranslated. And yeah, it looks like virus, but it's not the same word. It's just spelled the same. It means the venom, the poison, the strong smell. Animal seed, an active ingredient, that sort of thing. We know that Ovid wrote the Amores while living among the Scythians, so it's reasonable to assume that Dipsas is a Scythian woman, or at least based on one. But again, who cares about some old woman who knows how to distill the active ingredient from a pregnant horse. Believe it or not, modern science has shown us that if you're looking for estrogen, you should go to find pregnant horse urine because you'll never find a more potent source of it naturally. In fact, the drug Premarin, which menopausal cis women will often use to alleviate their symptoms, is just a portmanteau of pregnant mare urine. Premarin. Yeah. In another of his poems, Cosmetics for the Female Face, he mentions that horse urine extract is useful as a beauty treatment. Quote,
"Do not place your trust in grasses or a mix of juices. Try not the virus of a mare in heat."
I don't want to recite the entire poem here, but beforehand he talks about how being kind, being nice, being sweet, those are actually the best beauty treatments.
"Babe, you should smile more."
And then he talks about some other things that are still being used today, like using oatmeal or using egg whites. Admittedly, he does suggest that you'd not use horse pee on your face, but at least he was aware of it. And the fact that he mentions it suggests that it was probably fairly well known within Roman circles. After all, if it wasn't commonly known about, and he didn't want people to use it, he would have just not said anything. Now, I've never smelled horse pee before, but I don't imagine it's terribly pleasant. So I imagine the extract of horse pee is probably also not that pleasant. So I'm not sure if when Ovid says don't use it, if he's saying don't use it because it smells bad, here's some stuff that doesn't smell bad, that doesn't involve dumping horse pee on your face, or whether he was saying it didn't work. We do know, though, that applying estrogens to your face can have an anti-aging effect. In one study, it was found that applying Premarin to the faces of menopausal cis women reduced their wrinkles and thickened their skin. Ovid wrote Cosmetics for the Female Face when he was still in Rome as well, which suggests that this knowledge was a little more widespread than the Scythians. Chapter 4. What May Have Been. This is unfortunately all the information we have access to when it comes to the Enarei. The bits we do have, though, are so tantalizing, it's impossible not to slip into conjecture. If the Scythians were able to distill the virus from the horse urine, and they knew what effect it had, did the Enarei use it on themselves? Having been castrated, the Enarei wouldn't have had to worry about anti-androgens. In fact, many modern trans women undergo orchiectomies for just this reason. And of course, horse estrogens can be used in feminizing hormone therapy, though it's less common than it used to be. So could this female sickness that Herodotus was talking about just be ancient Scythian horse pee hormone replacement therapy? The answer is maybe. It's a stretch, admittedly, but it's not a huge stretch. And hey, if you want to imagine a culture of ancient Scythian transgender women who drank horse piss mixed with wine and were revered by the men in their society, go ahead. It's not illegal. The cops can't stop you. Besides, chuds love to imagine a history of Spartan warriors being strong and brave, and definitely heterosexual, and definitely not banging each other like all the time. So if you want to indulge in a little self-indulgent historical musing, I don't think there's any harm in it. So how likely was it that the Enarei actually used ancient Scythian horse pee HRT? Both Herodotus and Pseudo-Hippocrates spill quite amount of ink talking about how effeminate they were, how they served a woman's role in society, etc., etc., etc. But there are a couple of smoking guns that would suggest that they'd taken hormone treatment, a couple of very clear signs that they were feminizing themselves in ways other than socially. But we don't have that. Regardless of how their transitioning worked, however, it's clear that the Enarei were transgender and played a woman's role in society despite being assigned male at birth. Herodotus and Pseudo-Hippocrates both wrote their works during the 5th century BCE, that's the 400s. Most scholars agree that the New Testament of the Bible was written somewhere in the 1st century CE. So what that means is we have reliable, well-documented evidence of trans people being at least 400 years older than Christianity. So the next time somebody tells you that being trans is just this silly modern trend that the kids are into, you can tell them about the Enarei. Thanks for listening, everybody. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun making this video, and I'm excited to do the next one. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing. It's a very, very tiny gesture. It will take you literally 1/8 of a second to do each of those things, except the comment. It might take a little bit longer, and it makes a huge difference for this channel. And if you change your mind, if you get sick of me, you can always unsubscribe later. And if you especially enjoy this type of work, and it's feasible for you, consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll be using your funds to get better equipment, to learn how to do this video stuff a little bit better than what I'm doing right now, and to give back to the community as much as I can. One of the perks of joining my Patreon is that you get to vote on what the next video is going to be. This time I did the Scythians because I was excited about it. I just had to throw it out there. But the next one is either going to be on Elagabalus, the transgender woman who ruled Rome for 4 years, or Hermaphroditus, the mythological figure whose stories reveal a lot about what the Romans thought about both intersex and transgender people. The next video is going to be one of those two, and if you want to vote on it, you gotta join my Patreon. You'll find a link in the description. Thanks again for joining me today. I'll see you next time.